What if nothing is actually wrong with your life, but everything feels wrong because of what your mind has been trained to notice? Not all at once, not intentionally, but slowly, over time, your attention has learned to focus on what is missing, what is failing, what might go wrong next, and now it feels automatic. You don't wake up choosing negativity. It chooses you. A small problem appears and your mind stays there. A delay happens and it lingers longer than anything that went right. Something minor goes wrong and suddenly it defines how your entire day feels. Not because it was the biggest thing that happened, but because it was the thing your mind was trained to hold on to. And that is the part most people never question. Your mind is not neutral. It is being trained every single day by repetition. Whatever you think about most, whatever you react to most, whatever you give your attention to, your mind begins to treat as important. And once something is labeled important, your mind starts searching for more of it. That's why the same types of problems seem to follow you. Not always because they are increasing, but because your awareness has been trained to notice them more. Over time, that awareness becomes your reality. You begin to expect things to go wrong. You anticipate stress before it even arrives. And even when something good happens, it feels temporary, like it won't last. But what if the opposite is also true? What if you could train your mind to notice what is working, what is growing, what is going right even in small, quiet ways? Not by pretending everything is perfect, but by shifting what you choose to focus on within your reality. Because no matter how difficult life becomes, there is always something good present, something small, something subtle, something easy to overlook. And the more you begin to notice it, the more your mind starts bringing it forward automatically. At first, it will feel unnatural, forced, even uncomfortable. Your mind will resist it. It will try to pull you back toward familiar patterns, toward problems, toward doubt, toward everything it has been trained to prioritize for years. But that resistance is not failure. It is proof that something is changing. You are interrupting a pattern that has been shaping your thoughts for a long time, a pattern that has influenced how you feel, how you react, and how you interpret everything around you. And if you keep guiding your focus instead of letting it drift, something begins to shift, slowly, quietly, but powerfully. You begin to notice opportunities where you once saw obstacles, possibilities where you once saw limitations. Your energy changes not instantly, not dramatically, but steadily. You feel lighter, clearer, more in control of your thoughts, and that change does not stay in your mind. It begins to influence your actions, because what you see shapes how you feel, and how you feel determines what you do next. Because what you see shapes how you feel, and how you feel determines what you do next. Everything begins with attention. Most people are waiting for their life to improve before they allow themselves to feel better. But the truth works in the opposite direction. Your perception must change first. Without that shift, even better circumstances will be filtered the same way, through doubt, through fear, through what has been repeatedly noticed in the past. This is where control truly begins, not in changing everything around you, but in changing how you process what is already there, in deciding what deserves your attention and what does not. And once you understand this, you begin to move differently. You stop reacting automatically. You stop allowing your mind to drift toward whatever is loudest or most emotional. You begin to choose your focus, deliberately, consistently, with awareness. And in that choice, you begin to guide your thoughts instead of being guided by them. That is the moment where something begins to open up, not because life suddenly becomes perfect, but because your mind is no longer filtering everything through limitation. It begins to recognize growth, progress, and possibility. And over time, that becomes your new baseline. You begin to expect things to work out, not blindly and not without effort, but with direction instead of doubt. So the question is no longer whether there is something good in your life. The question becomes whether you have trained yourself to see it. Because whatever you train your mind to focus on will expand within your awareness. What you are about to repeat to yourself is not meant to be heard once and forgotten. It is meant to be repeated to be absorbed, to slowly reshape the way your mind processes everything around you. You repeat it when you feel overwhelmed. You repeat it when your thoughts begin to drift toward doubt. You repeat it when things do not go your way, because those are the moments when your focus matters most. And if you stay with this long enough, something begins to feel different. You do not just notice more good. You begin to feel more in control of your experience because life has not been working against you. You have simply been trained to see it that way. And now that training can change. There is a process taking place within every person, whether they are aware of it or not. It does not demand attention. It does not announce itself. Yet it operates continuously, shaping how you see, how you interpret, and how you experience everything before you. This process is the training of attention. You do not simply observe life, you are taught what to notice within it. If you were to begin again, you would not start by trying to change your circumstances. You would examine what your mind has been trained to see. There is a belief that perception is natural, that what you notice is simply what exists. But this is not entirely true. Two people can stand in the same situation, experience the same moment, and see it completely differently. One sees difficulty, the other sees possibility. The difference is not in what is present, but in what has been trained. There is also the way this training occurs. It does not happen suddenly. It happens through repetition. You notice something once and it passes. You notice it again and it becomes familiar. You notice it repeatedly and it becomes expected. And what becomes expected is what your mind begins to search for. This is how patterns are formed, not through intention, but through repetition. If you were to begin again, you would observe what you have been repeating. There is also the influence of emotional weight. As you begin to recognize that your perception has been shaped through repetition, the next step becomes clear. You must learn how to interrupt that pattern. Because before any thought becomes dominant, before any belief takes hold, there is always a brief moment where it can be redirected. That moment is small, almost invisible, but it is where control begins. Most people never notice it. A situation happens, and their mind reacts instantly. There is no pause, no awareness, only a continuation of what has been practiced before. And because it feels automatic, it feels real. But what feels natural is often just what has been repeated. If you were to begin again, you would not try to control every thought. That is not the goal. The goal is to recognize which thoughts are repeating without direction and interrupt them before they take control. Because a thought does not become powerful the first time it appears. It becomes powerful when it is allowed to continue. That is how patterns are formed. That is how identity is shaped. Not through a single idea, but through repetition that goes unnoticed. There is also the speed at which these thoughts operate. They arrive quickly. They feel convincing. They align with past experiences. And because of that, they are rarely questioned. You do not choose them, you continue them. And over time, that continuation becomes your default way of thinking. If you were to begin again, you would slow this process down. You would create space between what appears and what you allow to continue. That space is where awareness lives. It is the moment where you notice what you are thinking while it is happening, not after it has already taken over. And in that moment, you have a choice. Not a dramatic choice, not a forced decision, but a simple one. Do you continue this thought, or do you redirect it? This is where most people misunderstand something important. They believe that because they think something, it must be true, that it must be followed. But a thought is not a command. It is a suggestion, and suggestions can be accepted or rejected. If you were to begin again, you would stop treating every thought as truth. You would begin to observe them. There are many people who live entirely inside their thoughts. They do not question them. They do not observe them. They react to them as if they are reality itself, and over time, this forms their identity. Not something they consciously chose, but something they repeatedly allowed. If you were to begin again, you would not allow your identity to form without awareness. There is also the compounding effect of unexamined thought. When you think in a certain way repeatedly, it begins to feel permanent. You stop saying, "I am thinking this," and start saying, "This is how things are." And in that shift, thought becomes belief, and belief begins to control action. If you were to begin again, you would interrupt this process early, before thought becomes belief, before repetition becomes identity. You would begin to notice what you are allowing to continue. There is also a difference between observing a thought and participating in it. You can notice something without following it. You can recognize a pattern without reinforcing it. This does not require force. It requires awareness. You are not fighting your mind, you are guiding it. There are people who have developed this ability. They did not eliminate negative thinking completely. They did not silence their minds. They simply became aware of what they were thinking and chose which thoughts to continue. And through that process, they gained control not by force, but by consistency. If you were to begin again, you would practice this awareness daily. At first, you would notice your thoughts occasionally, then more frequently, then consistently. And with each moment of awareness, your ability to choose increases. There is also something that begins to happen when you interrupt these patterns. Thoughts that are not repeated begin to weaken. They lose their intensity. They appear less often. They feel less convincing. And over time, they begin to fade. Not because you forced them away, but because you stopped feeding them. But interruption alone is not enough. Because if you remove a pattern and replace it with nothing, your mind will return to what is familiar. That is why redirection is necessary. You must choose what you replace the thought with. If you were to begin again, you would not just stop thinking negatively. You would begin thinking deliberately. You would guide your focus towards something that strengthens you, something that moves you forward. This is where many people make a mistake. They believe that focusing on the good means ignoring what is difficult. But that is not true. You are not denying reality. You are choosing what within that reality you emphasize. Every situation contains more than one perspective. There is what is wrong, and there is what can be done. There is what is missing, and there is what is present. There is what is difficult, and there is what is possible. If you were to begin again, you would choose your point of focus carefully. At first, this will feel unnatural. Your mind will resist. It will return to familiar patterns. It will try to pull you back toward doubt, toward problems, toward everything it has been trained to notice for years. But this resistance is not failure. It is a sign that something is changing. You are interrupting a long-standing pattern. And any pattern that is interrupted will push back before it weakens. That is why consistency matters. Because each time you redirect your focus, you strengthen a new pattern. You begin to notice small things you once ignored. A moment of progress, a small improvement, something that worked better than expected. At first, these moments seem insignificant, but repeated, they become meaningful. Repeated, they begin to stand out, and eventually, they begin to shape your perception. There is also a shift that happens over time. You move from noticing what is missing to noticing what is present, from focusing on what is wrong to recognizing what is working, from reacting automatically to choosing deliberately. And this changes how you feel, because what you notice influences your emotional state, and your emotional state influences your behavior. You begin to feel less overwhelmed, less reactive, more stable, more in control. Not because your life is perfect, but because your focus is directed. There is also how others begin to perceive this shift. A person who constantly focuses on problems appears tense, reactive, uncertain. But a person who directs their attention toward what works appears calm, grounded, forward-moving. Not because they have no problems, but because they are not controlled by them. And over time, this becomes your identity. You are no longer someone who reacts to everything. You become someone who chooses what to engage with, and that choice becomes automatic. That is when control becomes natural. There is also the compounding effect of this process. Each time you redirect your attention, you strengthen your ability to do it again. Each time you notice something constructive, you reinforce that pattern. And over time, this becomes your default. You no longer have to force yourself to see the good. You begin to see it naturally, because your mind has been trained to look for it. And when that happens, everything begins to change. You stop feeling like life is working against you. You begin to feel like you are working with it. Not because everything is easy, but because your perception is no longer controlled by what weakens you. You have taken control of what you allow to grow within your awareness. And that changes everything, because in the end, you do not experience life exactly as it is. You experience life as you have been trained to see it. And once you understand that, you can begin to change it. In the end, this was never about pretending your life is perfect. It was never about ignoring problems, avoiding difficulty, or forcing yourself to feel positive when you are not. That approach does not last. It does not create control. It only creates resistance. What this is really about is awareness, because everything you experience is filtered through your attention. Not through what happens, but through what you notice within what happens. And that changes everything. You do not control every event. You do not control every outcome, but you do control what you give your attention to within those moments. And that control is where your power begins, because what you notice shapes how you feel, and how you feel determines how you act, and how you act determines what your life becomes over time. So this is not a small shift. It is a foundational one. Most people spend years trying to change their circumstances without ever questioning how they are perceiving them. They wait for something outside of them to improve, hoping that when it does, they will finally feel better. But if your perception has not changed, nothing truly changes. You will filter better circumstances the same way. You will still notice what is wrong. You will still expect what could go wrong. And you will continue reinforcing the same experience. That is why this begins internally, not by forcing positivity, but by training attention, by becoming aware of what your mind returns to automatically, by interrupting patterns that no longer serve you, and by deliberately choosing what you allow to grow within your awareness. At first, it requires effort. You will need to catch your thoughts, redirect your focus, repeat new patterns even when they feel unnatural. But over time, something shifts. What once required effort becomes easier. What once felt forced becomes natural. And what once dominated your thinking begins to fade. You start to notice more of what is working, more of what is improving, more of what is possible. Not because your life suddenly becomes perfect, but because your perception is no longer controlled by what weakens you. And that creates something powerful: clarity, stability, control. You no longer react automatically. You choose your response. You no longer feel overwhelmed by everything that happens. You focus on what you can use, what you can improve, what you can move forward with. And that changes your direction. Because a person who constantly focuses on problems slows down. But a person who focuses on possibility continues moving. And over time, that difference becomes everything. So understand this clearly. There is always something good present. Even in difficult moments, even in uncertain situations, even when progress feels slow, the question is not whether it exists. The question is whether you have trained yourself to see it. Because whatever you consistently notice will expand within your awareness. And whatever expands within your awareness will shape your experience. So begin here. Not by changing everything around you, but by changing what you allow your mind to focus on. Train it, guide it, repeat it, until one day, without effort, without force, you begin to see differently. And when you see differently, you begin to live differently.